I just wanted to reiterate the time for this. So we're going to do, again, 35-ish minutes for the panelists, and then another 10 minutes for audience questions. And then I'll let you know when it's time to line up at the microphones. So to introduce our panelists, we have the Houston ISD Superintendent, Richard Carranza, who is new to the position this school year. He was previously the superintendent of the San Francisco Unified School District, and he oversees a school district of about 215,000 students, 62% of who were Hispanic as of 2015-16 data. We have Courtney Boswell, who's the executive director of Texas Aspires, which is fighting in part to make accountability to make the accountability and testing system more robust. And they're big supporters of the new A through F rating system. We have Malfaro, who's the president of the Texas American Federation of Teachers, after serving as secretary for about 5 years. And he started his career in Austin ISD as a bilingual education teacher in 1987. And then we have Theresa Trevino, who's the president of Texans Advocating for Meaningful Assessment, or TAMSA, a group of parents that has worked over the last half-decade to decrease high-stakes testing in the state. So I wanted to start off by talking about the upcoming A through F rating system. So Texas is moving from a pass-fail system to one that would grade schools and districts on a rating system of A through F. Superintendents have said that this is not representative of their work, and it does not go along with their previous accolades that their schools and districts have received. And I think in the House there's soon going to be a bill to tweak the A through F rating system, and Senator Taylor has said earlier today that it's not a perfect system. What tweaks do you all see that need to be made in the A through F rating system, and do you think it'll work? Sure.
So in terms of school accountability, we're at a real juncture, not only in Texas but nationally. And one of the few things that Congress was able to actually pass last year on a bipartisan basis was reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which has now been dubbed ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, and No Child Left Behind got left behind. And big parts of what got left behind in NCLB were the linking of student test scores to mandatory punitive sanctions. Teachers, superintendents, parents are kind of fed up with tests being used as a bludgeon and a cudgel rather than a diagnostic tool. And so the feds have given states broad new latitude to redesign accountability systems. And Texas has taken a number of good steps in the direction of decoupling assessment, which is an important part of a good standards-based accountability system, from the kind of punitive sanctions that led to bad unintended consequences, like overly focusing the curriculum only on the parts that are tested. So we've seen things like a reduction in the number of tests required in recent legislative sessions. I think that it's pretty certain that this session we will see permanently put into place Senator Seliger's notion that we should not bar students from high school graduation simply based on the standardized test. I think A to F, though, is kind of a step backwards. We're back to the cudgel. We're back to blaming, shaming, labeling, and punishing. And I think superintendents object to A to F for a variety of reasons. One of them, though, is that we have a lot of good data now on how kids are doing. And we should present that in a way that doesn't oversimplify the very complicated work that goes on in schools. If I'm a parent and my kid's school gets a C, first of all, I don't know what that means. And second of all, I want to know, how's my kid doing? What are the standards that my child is supposed to be meeting? Is he meeting them? If not, where is he failing? What can I do as a parent to make that school get better? What should I be asking my state senator and state representative to do? I think A to F just represents more of the same old blame and shame at a time when we have a real chance in Texas to kind of rewrite standards-based accountability. Not throw the tests out, but use the information that tests give us in a way that actually drives improvement in schools.
I think that's exactly what A through F does, though. A through F gives us opportunity to see more information about what's happening in our schools than we've ever had before. We do have rich data, and we have information about performance and school climate and growth and post-secondary readiness that we've never been able to see or discern from our accountability system. And this new system with the 5 domains, which maybe we can tweak that to 3, 4, or 5, but we see in each one of those categories exactly how schools are performing and how parents can ask their teachers questions about, well, why are we not addressing these issues, or why are these students performing differently in this category, or why is our proficiency high but our growth is not. We've never been able to do that. That's a really powerful tool that we have at the disposal of taxpayers and parents and teachers and community members. So I think we're actually moving in the right direction as far as accountability goes.
Pues para mí la pregunta es muy sencilla. Entonces, si vas a asignarle una letra, entonces, ¿cuáles son los recursos que tienes para asignarle la letra? So, I'm sorry, if you don't speak Spanish, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but how are you going to assign an A through F grade to an English language learner student and show progress? How are you going to assign an A through F grade to a special education student that is struggling and you're actually moving them towards mastery? You see, the problem I think that we have with all the accountability systems is that we're trying to make it very simplistic. And it's not a simple process. School improvement is not a simple process. Teaching and learning is not a simple endeavor. Yet, I'm all for being really transparent with data. I'm all for being really, really accountable for student outcomes. The issue becomes when you issue a grade, then the realtor will say, well, you don't want to go to that, you don't want to buy a house in that neighborhood because it's a C school. Or you don't want to move your children to that school because it's a D school, without ever going to the next level and looking at what are they doing, what are the challenges, how are they addressing those challenges. So I think the challenge that we have with any accountability system is for it to be balanced. And I think that it becomes a very simple way of categorizing schools, where we know that school improvement is not a simple or easy process. And I use the example of English language learners because right now as we speak, of that 215,000, 26% of my students right now are English language learners. Yet they're going to be judged on this arbitrary mark of whether they're proficient or not. And then the grade could be assigned to them based on that. So I think you have to be very careful about how you categorize schools. And by the way, I want to know what the A through F grade is going to be for private schools as well.
Let me ask you specifically, what specific changes are you hoping now that the legislature is meeting their bills that are being filed to change this system, to adjust it? What are you hoping for in those changes? What are you lobbying legislators for?
Well, one of the changes is, one of the indicators is poverty. So, when you have a broad brush on an issue just like poverty, all poor kids are not the same poor kids, because a poor student in a rural community is very different from the poor student right now in one of my neighborhoods in Houston who suffers with issues of homelessness, issues of drug addiction, with violence, safe passages to get to school. There are issues attendant to urban centers that you need to be able to discern rather than having a broad brush. So one of the things that we're hoping for is that there'll be a little more fine line where you're talking about different levels of that kind of a subgroup. I think you also have to look at issues of mobility and looking at students that come in and out of a system. Now, if I have a student that's in HISD from kindergarten or pre-K through 12th grade, I own that student. But if I have a student that comes in and out of my school system, and sometimes, let's be honest, students are pushed out of school systems and pushed to public school systems, then who owns that F grade and who owns that A grade? So those are just two of the things. The whole college and career readiness. One of my colleagues, Mike Hinojosa from Dallas, was chuckling with me the other day because when we had the initial ratings that came out, he got a B in college and career readiness for Dallas ISD. And he was chuckling, not that he's not proud of his school district, but the neighboring school district, who has like 96% of their students going to four-year universities, got a C-. So he said,
there aren't pluses or minuses.
Well, in his mind, it was C-. So he said, then how could that be? Well, there's a lot of tweaking that needs to happen. But that's what happens when you try to put that kind of a of a grade on something that's happening in school systems that's dynamic.
Courtney?
Can I just address the one issue about the C grade in the school district that I believe that he's referencing in particular? So the school that district is predominantly affluent Caucasian students who performed well. They got an A. They have 300 Hispanic students who did not perform well. They were not being served in the college readiness aspects of what was being measured. And because of that, that's why they got the C. So what was happening was if I'm not the right person to explain it, but if you're not serving certain subpopulations, you get the lowest of those scores. So what it's saying is that district was not serving their Hispanic students like they were serving their Caucasian wealthy students. So that is a huge travesty, and that should be highlighted.
And I'm sure the C grade really got them working on it.
I'm sure it did. If they talk about it honestly, I'm sure it will.
Courtney, do you think that the A through F rating system is perfect as is? Do you think that it could use some tweaks?
No, it definitely needs tweaks. I mean, I think using attendance in domain 4 for college readiness of elementary school students is not great. There's a number of little tweaks, and I'm excited about those changes that will happen this session. I think we've got some strong leadership with our chairman right now on the issue, but no, there are definitely ways to improve it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but just because a perfect school district gets a C, maybe let's talk about that C and not throw out the whole system.
Well, and to the extent that this system is... Am I supposed to turn it on?
No, it should be turned on already. Try it again.
Maybe like Chairman Taylor, talk like this? I'm going to borrow
Yeah,
some.
just borrow the microphone.
Okay, our concern, being the parents, is that all of this is currently right now based on a test, and it is the STAAR test. And our concern is that this test was never fully vetted from the beginning, that there are schools that are getting F grades where children, 100% of them are passing the test, but the way that the system was initially rolled out on the first domain was it wasn't just on whether or not the kids passed the test, but it was also to what percentage passed at current passing rates. It's very confusing. And then there's post-standard readiness measures, which is supposed to be the 2020-21 level of passing for the STAAR test, what percentage of those were in there. And then finally there's the level 3, which is advanced. So you could have all your students pass at current standards, but still make an F because they didn't have, they maybe only had 10% or 5% or maybe 0% at that higher level. Thank you. And maybe there was a lower number of percentage at the post-secondary readiness standards. That's one point. A second point is, we know that the commissioner's gone through great lengths to show correlation studies between passing post-secondary readiness standards and SAT, ACT, and so forth. However, I'm also a physician, and in medicine we have a saying, things can be correlated, but not necessarily causal. So just because you've made this particular score on the STAAR test is not going to say, yes, that's going to cause you or make you go onto your post-secondary school. There's a lot of other factors in here, and we're hoping that in the A through F system, when they tweak it, there will be other factors that are considered, not just one test score on one day.
Theresa, how do you think that the STAAR test and the accountability system should be linked, if at all?
Well, I mean, I also was a commissioner on the Texas Commission of Next Generation of Assessment and Accountability, and we had many discussions. I served with Chairman Taylor and many wonderful people, wonderful educators, and several from the charters. And all of us started excellent discussions on, and I mean, this is not perfect because there's no perfect test out there, but all of you who have your children attend college, what tests do they ask for? SAT, ACT. And they ask for their GPAs. They want to know what courses they took. So why aren't we preparing our children to think deeply and critically for those particular exams, to be prepared? That's post-secondary preparedness. I know Chairman Taylor has ideas on funding an SAT, having the state fund an SAT so every child can take the SAT. I think that's a step in the right direction. But we would say, getting back to ESSA, we're only required by ESSA to take 3 tests in high school. So let's make these tests meaningful. Let's make them count. Not simply for the purpose of accountability, which, yes, as a parent, I want to know how my student is doing, but also for the purpose of, are they ready to move on to the next step? And what step should that be? Should that be industry certification? Should it be 4-year college? Should it be a 2-year college? Should it be the military? I mean, there's so many. Should it be a job, some type of other training? I mean, we need a lot more information than just, you know, a letter grade. And quite frankly, I found the letter grade confusing. You know, I had to break down and study. And, you know, I went through medical school and training. I'm a child psychiatrist. I can read charts and understand statistics this way to Sunday. But I will tell you, it's confusing, very confusing. And I think, and I'm hoping, that both Chairman Huberty and Senator Taylor, I know that they're working on a bill to try to be more inclusive of other measures or of other things that children are doing and schools are doing, so that there's a better way for us to understand how our schools are doing. We want to know, is our child learning? What are they learning? And are they on grade level? And right now, TEA has a hard time determining what grade level actually is. We've written them several times, and they give us 2 and 3 different, from 2 and 3 different people, 2 and 3 different grade level internal assessments that they use. So there's a lot more to it, and it's very complicated.
Right.
So can I just elaborate a little bit on what the doctor was saying? Here's the paradox of public education, and you're going to notice I keep using the term public education. It's the cornerstone of a democracy. If you do not have an educated populace, then people will settle for whatever they're told. So it's incredibly important that we have an educated populace. But here's the paradox with that. We view, and I use the general we view public education as an expense. It's a line item expense. And because it's an expense, we can feel free to cut it or redirect the money, but it's an expense rather than looking at an economic investment. And it may sound a little weird for a public school superintendent to say education is an economic issue. It's an economic issue. If we don't train, if we don't teach, if we don't develop critical thinkers, that is our future workforce. And in Houston, that's our future. And in Texas, that's our future. But here's the paradox, and here's the paradox of what happens on the ground in public school systems. Because you're tested and because you have certain tests, right now I have one high school that's under state receivership because they are an IR school for a number of years. Do you think that there's beautiful art programs in that school? Do you think that there's incredibly enriching after-school activities? Do you think that the teachers are feeling free to really develop critical thinkers and explore things beyond what's going to be on that test? Of course not. And the paradox is when right at the same time where we're talking about ramping up accountability, no one is talking about increasing funding to be able to meet the challenges that those students in those schools have. So the paradox becomes the conversation is about accountability, and we can talk about beautiful accountability systems. By the way, they're all based on end data. Doug Reeves calls it an autopsy rather than a physical exam, because once you take the STAAR test, there's nothing you can do about it. It's a point in time. And the paradox becomes that forces schools and school districts to make very, very Sophie's choices around what are you going to invest in. And I'm sorry, but if you look at what happens in private schools, where they don't have that accountability hammer, they're about educating children, you're going to see beautiful programs, you're going to see enrichment, you're going to see all these activities. And do they hold themselves accountable? Absolutely. Do we hold ourselves accountable? Absolutely. But you can't talk about accountability without investment. And right now, all we're talking about is accountability.
There's also a bigger issue that I think we're missing here, right? We've come to equate accountability almost with what are the negative consequences that are going to be the result? I mean, even Courtney's point about, well, it's a good thing that that school district only got a C because now they're going to be, there's a real theory of action question here, right? And we still sort of assume a lot of bad faith on many of the actors in the system. Certainly bad faith on these overpaid superintendents, right? We heard that earlier. Certainly bad faith on those teachers and their unions who put adult interests ahead of kids' interests, right? There's a lot of assumption about bad faith, but let's look at what this system of punishment has given us. It has given us a very flat line of performance over the last decade and a half. And there are other, look at the NAEP scores.
Exactly, look at NAEP, please do.
There are other systems, if we look outside our own boundaries and borders, that are doing much better educationally right now than Texas and the United States generally. And when you look at those systems, and those systems that have improved greatly, none of them are using a test and punish motivational accountability system. They are, and look, this is this is work for state legislators, right? So the National Council of State Legislators published a report this past year after a whole bunch of Democrats and Republicans looked at the OECD data, went and did site visits around the world to look at what other systems are doing. And there are some pretty consistent things. One is addressing the needs of children early in life, early childhood education, addressing poverty, which unfortunately in the US and in Texas, we're a real leader in that category, all right? Then it's teacher quality, right? And Jim Nelson's here in the audience. Jim and I served for almost a whole year before I bowed out, I hope not too ungraciously, on a commission that looked at the teaching profession. And Educate Texas, who's sponsoring this event, sponsored that. And I know Educate Texas has continued to dig in and look at things like, how are we preparing people to enter the teaching profession? I think there was some real honest conversation between the senator and Representative Huberty about, are we making teaching a really attractive profession? And it isn't just about pay and benefits. It's about wanting to come into a job where you bring your creativity and you are not told, on day one you do this, on day two you do this, and on day three you give this test. And that is really, really eroding an interest on the part of smart younger people to enter my profession. And then real articulation between higher ed, between the skills that kids will need to compete in the workforce, and K-12. All of the high-performing systems, if you look around the world, do this. None of them do what we have been doing for the last decade and a half, which is punishing schools, threatening to close them, threatening to reconstitute them. And to its credit, in Texas, we've moved away from some of that. Reconstitution is no longer one of the outcomes for a low-performing school. We've put community schools in instead. Let's go in and get the parents together, the nonprofits, the county, the city, the teachers, and let's figure out, what does this school need to turn around? And we have some really good examples here in Texas of schools that have done that, like Martin Middle School in Austin, which went from almost being closed for being IR for 5 years to being the highest performing Title I middle school in the city. How did they do it? It was an all-hands-on-deck approach, which is really what's needed in the neighborhoods that Representative Dutton was talking about, that are struggling with poverty, with multi-generational poverty, where, you know, the president of Brown University don't live in the 3rd Ward of Houston anymore.
Hey, Courtney, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. I mean, I just wanted to start by saying, you know, you had mentioned, I guess, 27% ELL students in HISD. Well, when I taught in Dallas ISD, my students were over 90% free reduced lunch, over 35% ELL, and I had to give my students A, B, C, D, and F. So I liked the accountability. I liked being challenged. I liked seeing the data. It taught me how to improve my craft, right? I only am able to learn and be better as a teacher if my principal is supporting me. So why is my principal also not accountable for the performance of in that, you know, what's happening in that school? I mean, it's like a nested system, and the testing wasn't burdensome. There's just so many excuses around. If the data from the test shows something that's problematic or wonderful, why don't we look at why do we criticize the instrument? If I had a fever, I don't throw out the thermometer and say, well, I'm not really sick, the thermometer is broken. I find out what's wrong. I change the conditions. I do wellness checks in advance so that I'm not getting sicker. I mean, it's not the thermometer's fault that I'm sick. So why are we blaming the test or the accountability system when that's designed to find out how we help and support and increase student achievement and build better neighborhood schools? That's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah.
And I would agree.
I actually couldn't agree more.
Okay.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think the difference is we're talking past each other. You didn't wait, because I spent over a decade in the classroom myself, and I was a teacher as well, so I get it. So I didn't wait till the end of the year to give a STAAR-like exam and then say, ooh, what should I have done differently over the course of the year? But right now, the teachers get labeled either as high performing or not, and schools get labeled the same way. What I did, which I'm sure you did, is you give formative assessments all along the way. Are they learning what we think they're learning? Based on that formative information, not at the end of the year, but after a week, after 2 weeks, after a unit, you adjust, you refocus, you re-engage. That's the craft of teaching. But you see, in an accountability system, that's never recognized. That's never recognized. All that matters is that autopsy is at the end of the year rather than the physical exam all along the year.
So you'd support more testing throughout the year?
No, I don't, because the testing,
No.
there's a difference between testing and assessment.
Absolutely.
There's a difference, and we intermingle those. And here's the other thing that I'll say, because I think it's important, and I'm not going to apologize for saying it, because this is a skin I live in. So that very school district that you mentioned that is, I don't know what percentage, white, affluent, they do very well, but they're a subgroup of Hispanic students. When they get that C or D on that one area, everybody's going to say, ooh, we just have to do better, but this is a great school. When that C gets applied to a school in the 3rd ward or the 5th ward, people are going to say, that's a horrible school. I got to send my kids elsewhere. So let's not recognize the elephant in the middle of the room. In communities of color, those letter grades mean send your kids somewhere else.
Theresa, I wanted to specifically ask, because the series of formative assessments is part of what came out of the commission that you were on, one of the recommendations that came out of
Right.
that. But you voted against the report, the final recommendations that came out. Can you talk more about that report?
I can. I mean, I supported many of the recommendations that were made by the commission, but that first recommendation was something we discussed, but we did not discuss fully. And one of the things that concerned me, and I brought up multiple times at the commission, was in the current climate and in the way that we run our assessment system and how we give assessments, there is all kinds of security measures. Schools go on shutdown. You've got to move students to the 3rd floor of the high school. Nobody can go to lunch. They have to take lunch in their rooms. In my mind, this was looking like that 3-time-a-year assessment was going to shut down the school 3 times a year. Now, keep in mind, it's not just a matter of just shutting down the school and giving an assessment. I mean, when I was coming up through Texas schools, I got the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. And we just showed up, and the teacher said, oh, today we're taking a test. It might be a couple of days, and we took our test, and we got a diagnostic report, not an autopsy. We got a diagnostic report. My concern with this type of thing is, let's do it without having the high stakes on the kids. Let's have this be a system that provides parents, students, and teachers, educators, everybody involved with that student, a clear picture of strengths, weaknesses, and targeted interventions. Very important word, because that is an ESA. The assessments are meant to be something that is low impact, something that is high quality, but doesn't have to be high stakes. Because when you throw in stakes, that automatically sends what Dr. Carranza was talking about and what Mr. Malfaro was talking about. everybody just goes into, that school's not going to get art or PE or not the rights, they're not going to be able to do any of the extracurriculars, and it's all going to be about teaching if you're in 3 through 8, reading and math. They're not going to get social studies. They will, and I hate to say it, but this is what happens. It's all about getting to that test and that score. My concern was, if we were to do an assessment that closed down 3 times a year, then that's what it was all going to become about right from the get-go. And without having some kind of context with which to give a test like that, this was, in my mind, going to be closing down schools 3 times a year. Not to mention, there are many unfunded mandates that come out of that, because each time a school has to give a test, depending on where they're located, they've got to hire between 15, 20, 25 substitute teachers to cover those other classrooms that are not being tested on that day. So it's a huge, huge unwieldy process, and for that to be the number one recommendation, I could not sign off on that. Although I agreed with many others that the commissioners and I could speak about. But one of the things for me and for our organization is remove the stakes. It's not required by federal law. It's not something, it is not something that we have to do. 13 states, only 13 states, place high stakes on the children, down from 25 just 5 years ago. So around the country, we're finding that there is accountability. There are other states that have new and wonderful ideas. Why don't we learn from one another and not just continue to do the same thing over and over?
So we're running out of time. Can I have people start lining up for questions? And I just wanted to ask specifically around the STAAR test. A 2015 State Board of Ed survey showed that there's a lot of consensus that people don't necessarily want the STAAR exam to be tied to high school graduation or movement between grades. Why is this still a conversation that we're having? What are you hoping will come out of the legislative session in regards to testing?
Well, I think in regards to the individual graduation committees and the surveys around STAAR, I think we've in Texas have had a testing requirement, an exit level test for graduation for 30 years. So for the first time, we took a bold step last session to alleviate some of those or reduce some of those graduation standards. We also at the same time see exponential growth in grade inflation. So people are able to complete coursework and get a high GPA for less effort or maybe less mastery than has been in the past. So the test was there as a safeguard to make sure that students could read, do math, et cetera, when they graduated, because grades didn't necessarily reflect that. So now you can use attendance. I know Chairman Taylor and I have had a lengthy conversation about that. We have non-objective measures that are going and determining a graduation, and that is a little bit scary in my opinion, and in the first time we in Texas have stepped back in over 30 years.
And I would disagree. Am I on? Anybody hear me? Okay. I would say yes, we do need, we are not against assessment, and we are not against having our students have mastery over the material. But let me just give you some statistics. Out of the 330,000 students that graduated in 2015, only 2% graduated on committee. And of those that applied for committee, only 50% were actually able to graduate. So it is not a diploma mill. Let me also add, not every student is a test taker. And this is why we've got a lot of people coming in and saying, let's look at the individual child. What the graduation committees do is you have to have taken that test, it's not that you can't take it or don't have to take it, you have to have tried to take it. Some kids took it 5 to 9 times. Yep. 2 tests. You know what the 2 most failed graded tests are? They're English 2 and the US History EOC. Those are failed at a rate of 83% combined, first time taken. You know which student groups fail the most? Your ELLs, at-risk kids, learning different kids. Okay, so again, we've been talking about targeted populations. Here we are once again. So what this does, what this committee does, and mind you, this is at the local level, and not every district has had to use it, nor has every district even started to use it. There are students who pass all their STAAR EOCs and don't graduate because they don't complete their coursework. So I would venture to guess that those students that apply for that committee, they have to also go on and show mastery in a different way. Usually it's by doing an extra project, not just an extra project, going back and attending class. It's by doing some type of in-depth research, which, by the way, mirrors what's happening in New York with the consortium, which mostly targets low-income kids, Hispanic, the African-American kids. It's a group of high schools within the New York state, and I know I'm saying New York and Texas, terrible. But what we like about this is it's an authentic assessment system. They use 3 of their Regents exams to graduate, and then they have to demonstrate mastery before a board where they show depth in the subjects where they don't test.
All right, we have to move to questions now,
Sure.
but feel free to talk about this if it comes up in any of the questions. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Jessie Meng. I've been a teacher for 12 years, and I took a personal day to be here today because it was not professional development. I teach music, so I don't have to do the STAAR testing, but I do deal and encounter all the teachers that do. And my biggest concern is, from day one of in-service, we're talking about data, we're talking about how these children test, how we're going to get them from point A to point Z. What they don't look at is pre-K through first, how far they were behind there. Second grade, you see second graders reading on a kindergarten level. And then these third grade teachers are supposed to work miracles. So what ends up happening is these third grade teachers look at these second grade classes, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't make these kids pass a test. I better quit while I'm ahead. So what I'm seeing a lot of in my 12 years is the teacher turnover rate seems to be very high. So what's happening is there's no consistency in education. And then also we get new principals in, we get new administrators, and everybody wants to try their new program. So there's this constant system of flux that is happening. So yes, the students are affected, but what about the students whose parents can't speak for them because they're working 2 jobs, or they don't speak English, or they don't have papers and they're afraid to come to the school? And how do we address this? Testing has nothing to do with that, but those are the students that we want to succeed more than any of them. So that's my question.
So there are a lot of negative unintended consequences when you attach high-stakes consequences to assessments. My son struggled in first grade to master reading, which shocked the heck out of me and scared me to death because I've read a lot about the research about kids who leave first grade not reading. But the school district back then, and this was kind of in the pre-sanction days, had a program called Reading Recovery. It was for second grade kids. It was sheltered, intensive reading instruction. Well, by the time he got to third grade and he actually had to take a standardized test, he had topped out on it. But as the sanctions tightened up, they canceled the program. They moved the resources into tutoring third graders that were at risk of not passing the test. And all the teachers said, why are we waiting till third grade to do this? And the answer was, we don't get tested till third grade. So this is the kind of stupid stuff that school districts do when they've got the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads, where the superintendent's contract is on the line, schools could be closed. There are a lot of dumb things that get done in systems where you overweight certain metrics.
And I'm sorry, this is way more time than I should have. But the fact that we hire more specialists to help the teachers who already know what the problem is, when we should hire more specialists to help the students actually incur with the issue.
Did you want to quickly respond, Courtney, before we go to the next question?
Sure. I just think the one thing that we're not talking about with sanctions and punitive measures and whatnot, why are we not talking about the fact that there are schools where students cannot read and do math and that they need help and that we're not providing that? If we don't know that those schools are not serving their students, we can't help them. I just think that's criminal. And so I don't know why we make it such a negative thing that accountability needs to exist and it needs to have sanctions. Because if not, then we're not serving the students in that school.
Let's go to the next question, actually. Sorry, we don't have very much time.
My name is Carlos Rodriguez. I am a graduate from formerly named Jefferson Davis High School in 2011, right down the street from here. I currently attend UHD as a hopeful social work graduate. So my question and my story is, I believe standardized testing failed me. I came to college well prepared, but not because I took those tests. I got 100 in my history test in my 11th grade year, and I was like, why did I get 100? Was it because I studied more for the AP test, which I did not actually pass? So I passed the standardized test, but I didn't pass the AP test. And then I felt unprepared in the sense that I didn't see the value in all those tests. They didn't seem to really shape my growth. What really did shape my growth was the personal experiences with the teachers and things like that. So why isn't it that we aren't receiving an education where we're using research from psychologists and scientists that prove that the way we're learning is not by bumping it all into little units and then not coming back to it. Instead, let's have this connection where we learn a material, we go to the next chapter, we connect it to the last material, we continue learning, and then we connect it to the last material, and we continue, and then it builds up. You don't have to necessarily have a whole day where you go back 2 months of material in one day. I mean, why isn't that the case for our public education system instead of having it where all these tests are the focus of it, which I believe failed me? So what do you guys have to say about that?
I just want to say I'm proud of this HISD graduate right here.
So there are other ways to test whether someone has learned something besides asking them to fill little bubbles in,
Of
right?
course.
They can write essays. They can do a project. They can perform a play. They can, and things that look a lot more like the things that we're going to do once we grow up and get out in the real world. They could sit with 5 colleagues and debate the points of policy, right? There are so many authentic ways, and you know who invented testing, right? Teachers, right? I mean, the idea about formative assessment, and I get exactly what Theresa was saying about not wanting the state to lean in even more into the classroom. Teachers, we're not just going to give you 1 test a year. We're going to give you lots of little mini tests. We make our own dang mini tests. That's what teachers do. They look at the curriculum and they design ways to figure out if students are learning. But the more authentic that you can make those ways, then the better prepared you're going to be when you start to realize, hey, life ain't about filling in bubbles. It's about working with other people. It's about using research. It's about solving problems. And we have had school districts come forward to the legislature and beg, free us from these standardized tests. Our kids already do great on them because they're mostly higher wealth, more affluent school districts, and let us experiment with new ways of measuring how kids are learning. And so far, they have hit a brick wall.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would, I would tend to agree with you. I had a son who also just never did well on standardized tests, barely passed. I mean, his SAT would be nothing impressive, but he's a junior in college right now and writing papers. He's already done a preceptorship. One of his professors asked him to do for his literature class. He's really grown and has been able to thrive. And I think the problem is not doing the assessment. Really, it's not. It's that it becomes all about it to the extent that we're not doing the problem and the project-based learning. We're not going to the depths that we need to. And that's what you need to be ready for college.
That's right. That's the only way currently, that's the way I'm learning now as a college student. And it becomes a shock because now I have to actually come together and think critically about what I'm doing, not just remember things or know how to take a good test, and that's it. Thank you so much. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thank you all. That's actually all the questions we have time for today, unfortunately. You can definitely go up and talk to the panelists afterwards. Please thank our panelists for being with us today.
You had the